Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and this podcast should be coming to you towards the end of May, where apparently everything is back to normal. The CDC apparently ruled that everyone who's been vaccinated is able to resume normal activities without a mask, so it will be interesting where that road takes us and what it means for getting back to everyday normal life. But also, as it pertains to my agenda on this podcast, what does that mean for the film industry? Are film productions going to resume to the level that they were at before the pandemic? Are theaters going to be open to 100% capacity? And off of that, are people going to be willing to pack a theater to 100% capacity? Or is it going to take more for people to go back to the way things used to be and for them to feel comfortable resuming normal life? While those questions will take a little bit longer to figure out, some questions I can answer for you on this episode of the podcast is there are still some fun movies out there. One film I'm going to be talking about is Zack Snyder's Army of Darkness. This film appears to be the latest incarnation of a band of misfits coming together in order to pull off some crimes in the vein of Suicide Squad or Guardians of the Galaxy. And to highlight the connection between it and films like Guardians of the Galaxy, it has one of the stars. Dave Bautista, who played Drax in those films, will be starring as Scott Ward in Army of the Dead. So I will be talking about that film a little later on in this segment. I will also be talking about the film Blast Beat, which is a bit of a throwback film as it is set right before the year 2000, and it tells the story of two Colombian brothers whose family moves to America in the hopes of finding better lives, but they do experience difficulties in adapting to a new way of life. So we will dive into that film in our second segment, and in our third segment, we're going to be talking about the new film Dry. This movie stars Eric Bana, who is returning to his hometown after 20 years to attend the funeral of an old friend of his who apparently went crazy, killed his wife and child before killing himself. With the rationale behind this crazy event being the man went insane because the town he is living in has been experiencing a drought for 10 years. So that should be an interesting film to talk about, with a bit of a murder mystery mixed with some science fiction and supernatural elements to go along with it. So we will be talking about the new film Dry a little later on in the show, and be sure to stick around until our final segment, as I recently discovered the MTV Movie and TV Awards are still a thing. Not only did I find that out, I found out that the ceremony was broadcast over 2 different nights across 9 different channels. And just to clarify, I'm not really one who enjoys throwing stones, but just from the production of this event to how absolutely insignificant these awards are, to just how these awards are just most blatantly a marketing tool, I really just feel the need to tear down the MTV Music and TV Awards. So to all of you listening, and those of you who will indulge me in that is what we will be doing in the final segment of this show. So, we have all that and more coming up on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but once again, we're going to start it as we start every week by pulling a book from 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. This week's feature is the film that put Dustin Hoffman on the map as it comes to being a leading man. And that, of course, is 1967's The Graduate.
To give a brief synopsis, the film starts right after Hoffman's character, Benjamin Braddock, graduates from college, which is where the film gets its name from. And during his graduation party, he's getting bombarded by all his parents' friends, trying to ask him about what he's going to do with his life. Some of these guests try to live vicariously through him by giving him advice and what he should be doing with his future. But the whole chain of events in this movie gets kicked off when his mother suggests that he give a ride home to one of their friends, Mrs. Robinson, who has had a bit too much to drink. Long story short, he gives her a ride home. We get the iconic line, "Mrs. Robinson, you're trying to seduce me." And from there on, the two engage in a torrid love affair. Throughout a majority of the rest of the film, the two meet up in different hotel rooms to engage in some activities that would be taboo by today's standards, and this was happening all the way back in 1967. So while the two of them are engaging in this carnal relationship, Benjamin's parents and Mrs. Robinson's husband are attempting to set up Benjamin with their daughter. So this film is worth watching solely to see the different character dynamics play off of one another, in addition to trying to follow a plot where a boy is having sex with one of his parents' friends, and he is then going to be taking out her daughter on a date. The plot may sound incredibly ridiculous, but the film is very much worth a watch. Not only for the story that is told on screen, but for the significance this movie holds in film history. Again, the subject matter of a young man who gets involved with a lonely housewife was fairly unheard of when it comes to mainstream cinema, and The Graduate also had a hand in changing how films marketed themselves. The now iconic Mrs. Robinson song by Simon and Garfunkel was written for the movie, obviously deriving its name from the naughty housewife in it, was just one of many Simon and Garfunkel songs used throughout the film, including Sound of Silence. And by having these two musicians who were super popular at the time doing the soundtrack, this enabled the film to draw in audiences both young and old. The film would only be able to claim one Oscar at that year's Academy Awards, but it was for Best Director for Mike Nichols. But despite the film not being able to clean up at award ceremonies, that didn't stop it from becoming one of the most iconic films of all time. It was way ahead of its time, and despite coming out over 50 years ago, it still holds up today. So for anyone looking for a classic movie with a timeless message, I highly recommend you check out The Graduate. But moving on from a piece of cinema that will likely endure for decades to come, we are going to be talking about a movie that just seems like an action-packed thrill ride, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. We are going to be talking about Zack Snyder's new film, Army of the Dead. To give you a not-so-brief description of this film, as there are a lot of elements at play. First, it steals a page out of a movie from 2009, as it is about a zombie outbreak. And where else would a zombie outbreak occur but in Las Vegas? As a result, the City of Sin has been walled off from the rest of the country. And for some reason, after zombie wars have already been fought, and Las Vegas being a boarded-up isolated city where these zombies are contained has just become an accepted part of society, the U.S. government decides now is the optimum time to nuke the city. So this will provide the movie with a ticking clock, but here is the premise. The main character of Scott Ward, played by Dave Bautista, is offered a proposition. Having previously fought in zombie wars, he is now resigned to a life of flipping burgers. That is until he is hired by a casino boss to go into Las Vegas and find a vault. This vault is in one of the former casinos, and it houses $200 million in it. So, because the main character of Ward has already lost enough, which I am sure is in reference to family that he lost during these zombie wars, he decides to take the job, and because this is a heist film, he needs to assemble a crew to help him with it. So to sum all this up, him and his team have 32 hours to make their way through zombie-infested Las Vegas and crack the safe before the government drops a nuke on it. I will say this about the film, it is a pretty unique collection of film elements, so I'll give Zack Snyder credit on that one. And before I dive into the film a bit more, I really do want to just give credit to Dave Bautista. This man has been through a lot in his life and is the ultimate example of perseverance. For those of you who only know him as Drax from the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, he used to be a professional wrestler, which he started doing when he was 30 years old, and for that profession, that is fairly old to get into the business. But despite getting into that industry late, and being given the character of someone who wears a sleeveless suit, and carries a collection box for a minister, he quickly rose to become one of wrestling's most recognizable faces and marketable stars. After leaving professional wrestling, he would have a brief foray with mixed martial arts, winning one fight, and from there, pretty much everyone knows the rest. He would make it big by being cast as Drax in the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, and was one of the best parts of that movie, as well as its sequel. And he would elevate his status even further by being part of the James Bond film Spectre. So for someone who was flat broke, decided to become a professional wrestler at the age of 30, eventually go on to have great success in that industry, then at the age of 40 to embark on a completely different career venture, to only once again experience great success, is very remarkable. And no matter the quality of this film, the fact that he himself is in the lead role of it is to be commended. So congrats, Dave Bautista. But to get back to how this film is being received, it was released on Netflix and in theaters May 14th. So far, it is proving quite popular. It has a 76% rating on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics, and an 81% from audiences. So, up until this point, it is being pretty well received. Once again, the film is directed by Zack Snyder, and this is his first project since completing Justice League, the Snyder Cut. And no matter what people say about Zack Snyder, whether it's his overuse of slow motion in 300, or how he has a real penchant for only telling dark, gritty stories, one thing you can always count on from his films is that they will be visually striking. And I can only imagine the visuals that will be attached to this action film where people are going to be fighting a horde of zombies. But aside from what I'm sure will be stunning visual effects, the film is composed of a cast of veteran actors, including Omri Hardwick, who is probably best known for his involvement in projects like Kick-Ass and the Starz series Power. Also in the film is Theo Rossi, who most people will recognize as Juice from Sons of Anarchy, and they're joined by other actors such as Tig Notaro, who is a comedian and host of her own podcast, Don't Ask Tig. The rest of the cast, while they may not be as well known by mainstream audiences, have had a lot of acting credits to their name. So hopefully everyone involved in Army of the Dead is really bringing their A-game and going to make this a rather enjoyable film. And again, for anyone who is interested in seeing this movie, you are able to see it two ways, and it is available now to you. You can see it from the comfort of your own home if you are a subscriber to Netflix, as I feel like 90% of the population is. Or if you really miss the ambiance of a movie theater and trust the CDC, you can go see it in a theater. The film was released on both platforms on May 14th, so by the time this podcast is coming to you, you will be able to check it out. So for anyone looking for an action thriller with a little bit of a heartbeat to it, check out Army of the Dead. Right now, however, we are going to be taking a quick break on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but be sure to stick around, as coming up, we're going to be taking a look at the film Blast Beat, which in some ways is a bit of a nostalgia film, as it is set around the turn of the century, but the main focus of this film surrounds two brothers from Colombia, whose family just moved to America in order to carve out a better life for themselves, but both they and their parents are finding it difficult to adapt to their new way of life. So that film should be fun to talk about from a couple different angles. Not only the compelling story that will be told on screen, but all the nostalgia boxes it checks off. I was a young kid around the turn of the century, so I feel like anything that brings you back to that age where you're really just discovering the world around you gets you excited, and the elements in this film that directly relate to the late 90s, early 2000s will be a lot of fun. Also in the next segment, I'll be bringing you the box office report. A little bit of a spoiler. Angelina Jolie's movie flopped terribly, even for this being unprecedented times. Who could have ever saw that coming? Where a movie with an undefined premise, starring someone whose star power has waned well past the point of her being relevant, would make for a disappointing debut at the box office. But we'll talk about that, as well as how the other movies that are running in theaters did, and be sure to stick around until our final segment, as I really just have to get off my chest and air my grievances with the MTV Movie and TV Awards. For one, I still didn't even know these were going on, and yesterday when I was scrolling through the channels on YouTube TV, I discovered that these awards are not only on, but they're on 9 different networks. This really just made me ask the question, how tone deaf are the executives at whatever parent company owns MTV now? And who do they think the audience for an award show like this is in this type of environment? The MTV Awards used to be for people that were somewhat rebellious and looking for an avenue to quote-unquote fight the power, which is what MTV actually catered to back in the day. But by having a few too many seasons of Silent Library, most people now just see MTV as absolutely crap programming. Not only that, but the viewers used to be predominantly teenagers and young adults. I would be surprised if teenagers today have even heard of MTV, let alone have any sort of interest in their award ceremony. So while this award ceremony may be a scapegoat in my ongoing argument against tone-deaf TV executives and how the entertainment industry is not adapting to the times, we will still be going over the MTV Movie and TV Awards in our final segment, so be sure to stick around for that. So we have that coming up, as well as the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report, and we will also be diving into the new film, The Dry, starring Eric Bana, which appears to be another in the long line of suspense thrillers coming out right now. And the GSMC Movie Podcast will be right back.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back into the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, and in the last segment, I just finished talking about the new Zack Snyder film, Army of the Dead. This film stars Dave Bautista as a man who is essentially hired by a casino owner to go into Las Vegas, which is now a walled-off zombie wasteland, in order to crack a safe that contains $200 million. But wait, there's more. The whole reason he is sent into Las Vegas in the first place is because the US government has decided to nuke the zombie wasteland for some reason. One would think he would either do that right away, or if it's just such an accepted part of a new society, just leave him be. But regardless of the believability of the plot, everybody's second favorite wrestler turned actor has to get a crew together in order to get into Las Vegas and crack the safe to retrieve the money. So this film, Army of the Dead, is built off the concept of a ragtag bunch of misfits having to come together in order to accomplish a common goal. Much in the vein of films like Guardians of the Galaxy and Suicide Squad, hopefully it is as enjoyable as one of those and much better than the other. Once again, the film is directed by Zack Snyder, so at the very least there will be some very cool visuals, and for anyone interested in seeing it, it is available on Netflix and in theaters. So if you're in the mood for an action comedy, I suggest you check out Army of the Dead. If you are into more of a character-driven drama, however, you would probably be more interested in the next film I will be talking about, and that is the film Blast Beat, which tells the story of two Colombian brothers who moved to the United States both to attend school and in the hopes of carving out better lives for themselves. This film actually stars two real-life brothers, so it'll be interesting to see that dynamic played out on screen. Furthermore, it'll be interesting to take a look at how the film examines the immigrant story. In this case, one of the brothers is really here to better himself. He's always had the dream of working for NASA, so all his efforts are focused on accomplishing that one single goal, whereas his brother is really not taking advantage of the opportunity he's given. He's getting in fights and appears to have no interest in really bettering himself. So, a little later on in the segment, I'll be taking a look at the film Blast Beat, which was an official selection at the Sundance Film Festival last year. But right now, I'm going to be taking a look at the films that have been selected for theatrical releases and how well they are performing at the box office right now. Last week's number one grossing film was no real surprise, and that was Guy Ritchie's film Wrath of Man, which starred Jason Statham as pretty much the character Jason Statham plays in every movie, a guy who shoots a lot of people. The film made over $14 million, earning it the number one spot at the box office last week. Its next closest contender was Spiral from the Book of Saw, which made its debut over the weekend, and for some reason that is just beyond my capabilities as a person who follows the media industry. This film was able to make $8.7 million. And that is when you just factor in it only having 2 days to accomplish that feat. And while I know people love franchises and there's always that just attachment to go with what's familiar, and again, there's those factors that just make horror films appealing to some people, the good films in this franchise came out over 15 years ago. The franchise was dormant for over 7 years, then came back with what I guess was supposed to be a farewell to the character Jigsaw. Now it's completely rebooted with Samuel Jackson and Chris Rock in it, so it doesn't even resemble what the original franchise was, but for some reason, people will still turn out in droves to see something that is even loosely related to the original film. But I cannot lament this too much, as whatever contributes to getting the theater industry back up and running is a good thing right now. And one film I think that people thought would be helping theaters a bit more is the new Mortal Kombat film. And despite being out for a couple weeks now and being simultaneously released on HBO Max, it was able to pull in a respectable $3.1 million last week. That aside, the film is fairly awful from most accounts. It scored a 55 from critics on Rotten Tomatoes, and for some reason it has an 86 percentage from the audiences. So, the quality of that film probably lies somewhere in between. Nevertheless, it is still performing pretty well at the box office. Speaking of its box office performance, it was able to outperform the very hyped movie Those Who Want Me Dead, which stars Angelina Jolie. That's right, the special envoy to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees is apparently still an actress and is still making movies. And because of her involvement, there was a ton of hype around the film Those Who Wish Me Dead. Yet, not so surprisingly, a film starring an actress who has made 6 films in the last 10 years. And aside from her divorce from Brad Pitt, someone who is pretty much faded completely out of the social consciousness, did not draw in audiences despite it going up against fairly weak competition. And I know with COVID, everything is relative, so the amount it generated at the box office is fairly respectable. But Those Who Wish Me Dead was supposed to be one of the films that would help bring the theater industry out of its rut. And while I have absolutely nothing against Angelina Jolie, I think that her humanitarian work is incredibly commendable and worthy of recognition. I just think she's a star that has had her time. But to not completely dump the failings of Those Who Wish Me Dead solely on her lap, maybe if the trailers somewhat explain the premise beyond the fact that there are fires erupting and the main characters have to avoid them, that could have possibly drawn in a few more people to the movie. That being said, the film did manage to nab $2.8 million in its debut weekend. However, it could not perform the sleeper hit Demon Slayer Mugen Train, which again is an animated film from Japan about a character who loses his entire family to demons and his little sister becomes one, so he decides to dedicate his entire life to being a demon slayer. That film managed to collect another $4.7 million at the domestic box office, which again I think is just amazing considering this is an animated film that pretty much came out of nowhere, and to date it has collected nearly $42 million at the box office. So congratulations to Demon Slayer. But aside from those standout performances and those new releases, it was pretty much status quo at the box office. Films that managed to clear over $2 million included Raya and the Last Dragon and Godzilla vs. Kong, while films that were able to clear over $1 million were the Bob Odenkirk film Nobody and the sleeper horror hit Separation, which quite honestly, if I had to recommend a horror movie between that and Spiral from the Book of Saw, give Separation a chance. But anyway, the final film to clear over $1 million at the domestic box office was the new release, Here Today. This is a film that stars Billy Crystal and Tiffany Haddish, and while Billy Crystal is well past his comedic peak and Tiffany Haddish absolutely sucks, Here Today was able to bring in a relatively respectful audience. And while there were some decent performances at the box office, I think we will see a major number next week from Army of the Dead, and I think it will only go up from there over the next 2 weeks as we have films like A Quiet Place 2 and Cruella hitting theaters. So, slowly but surely, theaters are making their way back. And that will pretty much do it for the box office report. But don't worry, if you haven't gotten the idea already, we do this every week. But right now we're going to be transitioning into talking about the new film, Blast Beat. And while this film is new to audiences, it was released last year as it was a submission in the Sundance Film Festival. But we all know what happened, and here we are many months later, and Blast Beat is getting its debut via video on demand. Set to be made available Friday, May 21st. This film centers around two brothers from Colombia who emigrate to the U.S., and they are actually played by two real-life brothers. One of the brothers, Carly, has the lifelong ambition of working for NASA, so all his motivation in this film is going to be centered around achieving that goal. Conversely, the other brother, Mateo, is not as excited about being in the United States and really doesn't care about trying to find a place for himself in his new environment. Now, while this film is on its surface about the dynamics of these two brothers adjusting to life in America, it is really just an overall story about immigrants adapting to life in America. Now, some of these are very surface level and obvious, like Mateo getting in fights at school because he doesn't fit in and looks different, while there are more complex issues that are put under the microscope when it comes to America's immigration policy, and one of these is the brother Carly maybe not being able to attend the school that he wants to because his paperwork isn't filed correctly and because he may not qualify for a student visa. Now, immigration in America is always a hotly contested issue on both sides, but when it comes to how these stories are often portrayed on the big screen, they all seem to blend together as fairly generic without much originality. But this film, Blast Beat, seems to have taken a fresh approach on telling that story, whether it's with giving us a character in Mateo who is actively rejecting his new environment and doesn't really want to find his place in it, or if it's following the character of Carly and actually being exposed to some of the inner workings of the immigration system, which I'm sure 9 out of 10 Americans have no idea how it works. But that is what the movie Blast Beat is trying to do in some capacities, illuminate people to the different hoops and roadblocks immigrants have to overcome to just be a part of the system. And it's not like in the case of Carly, where he's coming here to be an Instagram influencer. He's coming here to be an engineer. He wants to dedicate his life to working for NASA and developing technologies that will quite literally propel humanity further as a species. And I know that immigration is an incredibly controversial topic, but when you break it down to just basic human elements, this is an individual who's trying to accomplish a goal he set out for himself of working for NASA. NASA is located in the United States. He has the potential to work there, but because he was born in a country without a space program, the only option he has is to move to America in order to accomplish his goals. So him coming to America isn't even really out of desire, it's out of necessity. And he sees the immigration process as just a big bunch of frustration. And that frustration he experiences, I assume, has to be the reason the film is entitled Blast Beat in the first place. And for those who are unfamiliar with the term, like myself, it is when someone is drumming and they go less for a rhythmic sound and are more so looking for an explosion of sound. Carly in the film is a metalhead and he does play the drums, but I assume that that is also a metaphor for him thinking that his life should actually be able to follow the plan that he has set out for himself, but he soon discovers that it is more in the vein of nonsensical political chaos, which in this film, of course, is represented by the immigration system. So no matter your point of view on the issue, this film should provide some fairly compelling insights as well as a fresh perspective on the immigrant story. And like I said, the two brothers in this film are actually portrayed by two real-life brothers. Those two brothers are Moises and Mateo Reyes. And since these two brothers are from Colombia, I have to imagine that the film is semi-autobiographical. And while Mateo has not had that many substantial film roles, his brother Moises has appeared in such films as Ender's Game, King Kong Skull Island, and King of Staten Island. A few other notable cast members include Wilmer Valderrama, who everyone should recognize as Fez from That 70s Show, which was one of the best sitcoms of all time, but is a bit tainted right now. Thanks a lot, Danny Masterson. Daniel Day Kim also has a supporting role in the film, and I'm sure that everybody is familiar with him from the TV show Lost, which despite having ended over a decade ago, he still looks exactly the same. And rounding out the main cast is Diane Guerrero, who is probably best known from her reoccurring spot on the Netflix series Orange is the New Black. So, for anyone interested in checking out the new film, Beat Blast, it will be made available starting May 21st via video on demand. So be sure to check it out from the comfort of your own home. Right now, however, we are going to be taking a quick break on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but don't go anywhere because coming up in our next segment, we do have the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report, and there is a pretty substantial piece of news as it relates to the film industry, as there was a producers union formed. Now what that means and how it'll affect the industry is yet to be determined, but that's a pretty significant move. So I will be talking about that as well as other industry news. Also in the next segment, I will be getting into the new thriller, The Dry, which stars Eric Bana, as he returns to his hometown in an attempt to reopen the case about a friend of his who apparently killed his wife and child before committing suicide. Not only does he have to contend with that, but something from their past regarding the death of a girl who apparently drowned, but there may be something more to that case as well. So I will be getting into that Aussie thriller, and be sure to stick around until our final segment, as I'll be talking about the MTV Movie and TV Awards and how they are absolutely pointless. And I do understand the need for a lighthearted award show that doesn't take everything as seriously as the Academy Awards. I'm talking more than just the awards they give out. I'm really just talking about it as how they present it to audiences, and how it really just seems to be an institution that has absolutely no idea what time period it is operating in. So, we will be having some fun at the expense of a TV award ceremony that was aired on 9 different channels over the span of 2 nights. So stick around, we have all that and more coming up on the GSMC Movie Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Rich McDonough, And in the last segment, I just finished talking about the new film Blast Beat, which tells the story of two young brothers who emigrate to the United States from Colombia. While the story is a retelling of the classic immigrant adjusting to life in a new country story, this one does have a rather contemporary take, and it does have a bit of a unique story attached to it. It focuses in on two brothers, one of which has the lifelong ambition of working at NASA, so he's come to the United States for his final years of high school in hopes of getting into a college that will put him on the path to working for NASA. Meanwhile, the other brother is not adapting well to his new environment. He's getting in fights and really doesn't want to assimilate to the American culture. So, by the film providing these two different perspectives of these brothers, it gives you a commentary on the different trials and tribulations immigrants must face when they move to America, and provides a bit of an insight into the immigration process in general, which I guarantee you most Americans aren't familiar with. So the film will be a bit thought-provoking when it comes to the plight of the immigrant. Also, in addition to starring two real-life brothers as on-screen brothers, the film stars Wilmer Valderrama, which most people will recognize as Fez from That 70s Show. Or if you watched terrible MTV program in the mid-2000s, the Yo Mama Show, where essentially he just told Yo Mama jokes. But also in the cast is Daniel Day Kim from Lost and Diane Guerrero from Orange is the New Black. So if any of you are interested in seeing the new movie Blast Beat, it will be available starting Friday, May 21st via video on demand, so you don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home to check it out. Which I guess is a tad ironic when you consider it's a film about people leaving their country to better their own lives. But whatever, we won't really get into that heavy stuff right now. What we will get into, however, is the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report, and there is a lot to get to. Probably most notably is the fact that there is now a producers union in the film industry. It was announced Thursday that 108 filmmakers are banding together with the intent to start a union to address low pay and skimpy healthcare benefits. And to everybody wondering what a producer exactly does, think of them as the business administrator on a film. They are ultimately the one responsible for making sure that the project is completed. And I'm sure a lot of you are thinking producers make a ton of money. Those are executive producers who are mainly people that finance the film. Thus, they have the most ownership over the film, so they make most of the profits once it is released. But when it comes to actually making the film, they really have very little to do with it. The producers in this union are the ones that are responsible for hiring everyone from directors to crew members to actors. The main goal of this organization is stated to be essentially establishing a pay floor, so people in these positions are not at the mercy of having to take whatever they're offered just to work and pay their bills. And to give you an idea of what they are referring to, a survey of producers from 2019 stated that around 41% of them made less than $25,000 for the year. Now, like any aspect of the film industry, there are incredible outliers that are able to command whatever numbers they really want. These are people that are pretty well known, such as Kevin Feige, Kathleen Kennedy, Jerry Bruckheimer. They, of course, are pretty much able to command whatever rate they want, given their past success, but for a lot of people that are just trying to make a living, they really do not have a lot of power when it comes to negotiating their salary. And while there is a lot to be sorted out as to the finer details of actually getting a union together, I think this would be a positive thing for the film industry. Having an avenue like this would actually make it easier for younger producers and people without industry connections to get into this field, opposed to what the traditional method for producers entering the field is now, and that is them coming from money and are essentially able to be in the role of producer because they don't have to worry about the wages they're actually paid for doing the work on the movie, and they can pretty much just enjoy the glamour that comes with being a producer because it's all a game to them, really. So this new producers union weeds out people like that and provides more opportunity to people that are actually talented and more dedicated to the craft than all the trimmings that come with being a producer. This should be a pretty good thing for the film industry. So I'm interested to see how this all plays out. But moving right along into a bit of a more somber story, the comedic actor Charles Grodin passed away this week at the age of 88. Grodin is probably best remembered for his role opposite Robert De De Niro in the film Midnight Run, and his involvement in the Beethoven series, which for some kids who grew up in the 90s was a big deal to them. Personally, never seen the films, don't really understand what the whole draw about a movie based around a dog really is, unless he is in Air Bud and they're playing sports. Nevertheless, Grodin did have a very esteemed career, earning himself a Primetime Emmy for writing, as he was a member of the staff for the Paul Simon special, which took place in 1978. And while there is not much to report on his career in recent years, he has definitely left his mark on the film industry. So rest in peace, Charles Grodin, with thoughts and prayers going to his loved ones. In other news, Martin Freeman, the man who played Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit and is currently on the show Breeders, pretty much condemned method acting in a recent interview he did. He called the practice of pretty much inhabiting a character while you're on set and not breaking character until the shoot is over incredibly selfish, and actors that engage in that type of acting are a pain in the ass to deal with. His rationale behind this was pretty much when an actor goes into that territory, it no longer becomes a job or professionals performing a craft. It turns into one individual essentially going off the rails, and one example he cited was Jim Carrey in his portrayal of Andy Hoffman for Man on the Moon. It has often been reported that Carrey was a very difficult person to work with on that film, and he is actually of the belief that he was inhabited by the spirit of Andy Kaufman during that shoot. And while that is a very intense example, method acting is a practice that's been used by a lot of people. Some notable examples include Alec Baldwin and Al Pacino, but it is interesting to see one actor decry a form of performing that, while controversial, has been a staple of the film industry and other performance mediums for a very long time. In other news, the trailer for No Sudden Move dropped, and regardless of what the content of this movie is, based on the cast, it really just has the feel of a big prestige picture that we really haven't seen for a while. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, the film stars Matt Damon, Brendan Fraser, Don Cheadle, Ray Liotta, Benicio del Toro, and John Hamm. That film is set for release at the Tribeca Film Festival June 18th, and then to be released on HBO Max July 1st. So if you were looking for a film with major actors in all sorts of different roles, check out No Sudden Move and add it to your calendar. But to be closing out the GSMC Movie News Report, I'm going to be taking a look at a couple big announcements as it comes to the business side of the film industry. First of which, Warner Media is set to merge with Discovery, which will not only give the brothers Warner domain over all the animal programming supplied by that company, but they will also be getting the inventory of channels like the Food Network, HGTV, A&E, the History Channel, Lifetime, and the Travel Network. So while in recent years we've sort of seen an overabundance of streaming platforms where different media companies have cut out the middleman and have started to provide their content directly to their audiences, we are seeing some of the first signs of media concentration. This move will add to Warner Media's content library, which already consists of HBO Max, and will make their parent company of AT&T's market share all the larger. So that is one business move to keep an eye on, and the other one to keep an eye on is Amazon putting in a $9 million bid to buy MGM. This is all in an attempt to increase Amazon's media library, as since the launch of Amazon Prime Video, they have really tried to carve out their share of the marketplace. When it comes to original series, they are pretty hit and miss, with a few successes like The Boys and The Man in the High Castle, but when it comes to their original films, there has not really been anything of note coming out of the house that Bezos built. Now, it does remain to be seen whether or not this deal will go through, but it most definitely has to be taken seriously because people don't just throw around $9 billion. When Bezos could just as easily forward all of it into creating more phallic-shaped spaceships. But that will pretty much do it for this installment of the GSMC Movie Podcast News Report. But be sure to stay tuned, because each and every week I'm going to be bringing you the latest breaking news as it pertains to the film industry. But moving on to our feature film of the segment, let's talk about the new suspense thriller The Dry. This film stars Eric Bana and features a predominantly Australian cast. To give you a quick synopsis of the film, Eric Bana's character, federal agent Aaron Falk, is returning to his hometown after almost 20 years in order to attend a funeral of his friend, who was reported to have killed his wife and child before committing suicide. While back in town, he is convinced by people that were close to the friend that killed himself to reopen the case, as many of them can't believe that he just out of nowhere decided to murder his family and then kill himself. Agent Folk agrees to do so, but being back in his hometown conjures up memories of another death that happened, and that is of a young girl who drowned in a river. While her death was ruled as an accident at the time, people believe that Falk may have had something to do with it, and as he investigates the case of his friend, he believes that the two deaths are somewhat related. Also, there is probably another major plot point I should let you know about. The town in question has been experiencing a drought for over 10 years. And I know what I'm about to say would be a logistical nightmare, and there would be a lot of things that would have to go into it. If you are in a place where there's been no natural water source for over 10 years, it may be time to just move the goddamn town. But back to the main story at hand, this film seems to be built around Eric Bana's character, Agent Folk, having to prove the innocence of his friend, as well as proving that he had nothing to do with the girl's death that occurred over 20 years ago. So this film is the quintessential suspense thriller, and essentially Eric Bana's character is treated like an outsider, having left the community, and while he has adjusted to life outside of the town, everyone who has stayed in the town pretty much resents him for leaving and are reluctant to cooperate in his investigation. And one of the biggest elements at play in the entire film is the fact that there has been a drought in this town for so long, and it's really taken a toll on the people in the town mentally. They all seem to be suffering from some level of psychosis due to it, and in an interview he did for Screen Rant, Eric Bana actually referred to just the drought being its own character in and of itself. And this film, The Dry, has been playing in Australia all this time, and Bana said that that was one of the elements that really made it connect with audiences in Australia, of how they are just able to relate to going through intense droughts and the toll that that takes on the environment and the people within the environment, and how it can really just mess with you mentally. Not only that, but in extreme droughts, wetlands dry up, trees begin to deteriorate, and the survival rate of animals in the area is very low. And while we're on the subject of droughts, one interesting fact I found while looking this up is that there was speculated to have been a drought that lasted 38 years from 1210 to 1258. So while the idea of a drought lasting over 10 years sounds a little ridiculous, there is actually evidence to suggest that there was a drought that lasted almost 4 times longer than that. But getting away from weather anomalies, this movie, The Dry, has been playing in Australia for a while, and it is now making its way to US theaters. So if you are a fan of mystery and the whodunit genre, I suggest you check it out. It will be playing in theaters on a limited basis starting Friday, May 21st, but it will also be available via video on demand. So no matter what your preference is, you will be able to check out The Dry. Right now, however, we are going to be taking a quick break on the GSMC Movie Podcast, but for those who would like to stick around for our 4th and final segment, I will be doing my best to make it worth your while as I absolutely just rip apart the MTV Movie and TV Awards. And before I even get into that topic, I really just want to let everyone know I'm fully aware this award ceremony is supposed to be fun, and it's just supposed to be taken at face value to be just a celebration of the film industry without the politics and the phony reverence of some of the other award shows. But when I first saw a promo for the MTV Movie and TV Awards, I thought, oh, like that's worth making one joke about. Then I saw the actual presentation of the award show, and then I did a little bit of research into the award ceremony itself, and the structure of this award ceremony literally seems like kids that were in a high school play were looking to find a reason to pat themselves on the back and decided to throw an award show while they were pretty much just making it up as they went, without even knowing what the structure of an award show is. And when it came to the event itself, hell no, I didn't watch it, but just looking at a few clips online and the different sketches that they did during the ceremony really just got me thinking about this whole larger premise that there's a bunch of studio executives and higher-ups in the media industry that really have no idea what they're doing and have no idea how to present a product to their audience. And in fairness, that may be a larger gripe I have about the industry, but the MTV Movie and TV Awards are going to be my scapegoat. So stay tuned. We have that coming up right here on the GSMC Movie Podcast.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome back into the fourth and final segment of the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. In the last segment I wrapped up talking about the new film The Dry, starring Eric Bana. This film has already been released in Australia and is proving quite popular with audiences, and it is now making its way to the US market. It follows the character of Eric Bana's Agent Falk, who is a federal agent returning to his hometown for a funeral for one of his old friends who allegedly went crazy, killing his wife and child before committing suicide. After returning to his hometown and attending the funeral, he is convinced by people that were close to the alleged murderer to reopen the case in hopes of proving his innocence. He decides to do so, but while he is investigating this murder-suicide, he begins to have flashbacks to another death that occurred in the town, and that was one of a young girl who he was also friends with and apparently drowned in a river. He is of the belief that the two murders are connected in some way, and because he was with the girl when she drowned, people start to believe that he had something to do with it. So while he is investigating this case, the people of the town begin to accuse him of causing the death of that girl. So this movie, The Dry, is a classic whodunit scenario. It really resonated with audiences in Australia, so if you're interested in checking it out in the US market, it will be released in theaters on a limited basis starting Friday, May 21st, and it will also be released via video on demand that same day. So whatever your preference is. And if you are a fan of the mystery whodunit genre, check out The Dry. But shifting gears into the final topic of the podcast, I want to talk about the MTV Movie and TV Awards a little bit. Not really so much the winners and losers like I have done for other award shows. The main reason being those are actual award shows that have criteria for giving someone an award, and the MTV Awards seem to just be rewarding whatever the most popular flavor of the month is. And again, I do have to clarify, I'm fully aware that the MTV Awards are supposed to be fun and they're not supposed to be taken seriously, and I am all for an award show that recognizes mainstream movies and actually features movies that most people have actually seen. Just when I look at the structure of the MTV Awards and just everything from top to bottom makes me wonder who are the people that believe how they structure this event is a good idea, and who is the target audience for this crap anymore? Like, everyone knows that MTV started out by playing music videos and was essentially just TV all about music, and then they shifted into really targeting the teenage demographic with their programming. But everyone aside from studio executives seem to recognize that media and intake habits have changed drastically especially for teenagers. Teenagers don't actually sit down and watch TV anymore. It's not like they grab the remote and turn on MTV and watch it for a few hours. Teenagers watch content online and on their phones and mobile devices, and they're not watching episodic television. They're watching a 3-minute video on YouTube, then they're watching a 10-minute video on YouTube. And most oftentimes they're doing this while they're doing something else, so they're not making the content they watch appointment viewing. So just based off of media intake habits, I really can't see MTV actually cultivating that demographic anymore. And even if they are, there's no way that demographic is going to sit and watch an award show that is multiple hours long and takes place over the span of 2 different nights. So that was just one of the questions I had about the MTV Awards, is really just, who is this for anymore? And another question I had is, when I was flicking around on YouTube TV, I saw that not only was this award show happening, it was airing on 9 different networks. Not only was this on MTV, but it was on BET, CMT, Comedy Central, VH1, and Pop TV, in addition to a few other channels owned by Viacom. But just the idea of it airing on 9 different networks should show you that this award ceremony really doesn't have that much drawing power to begin with. It being on 9 different networks doesn't mean that there's such demand for this product that it's being requested by all these different platforms. This ceremony being aired on 9 different networks is something that the studio can tell the sponsors and sell it as, you're getting 9 times the exposure as you would for a normal award show, which may sound appealing, but if I'm a sponsor who's paying for ads on Comedy Central, I would roll the dice on having my commercial air during a rerun of The Office that has been on the network a million times already. Because I honestly believe a block of Office episodes would be more appealing to the average viewer than the MTV Movie and TV Awards. So all in all, I thought the way they presented it was rather foolish, and having it take place over the span of 2 different nights was pretty pointless. And as a result of this taking place over 2 different nights, they had 2 different hosts. One of which was Leslie Jones, who I'll have something to say about a little bit later on. But having Leslie Jones as a host just shows you how out of touch the people making the decisions around this award ceremony are. I have nothing against Leslie Jones, I just think her stick wears pretty thin over an extended period of time. I get it, she's loud and abrasive. There are times where she's incredibly funny, but those are long behind her. The only work she has right now is being a spokesperson for Uber Eats and hosting a show called Supermarket Sweep, where the premise of that show is literally making a competition out of getting groceries. With all that being said, she is not even the worst host that they got for this event. The host of night 2 of the ceremony was Nikki Glazer, and every time I see this girl, I just want to say, who the hell is Nikki Glazer? If you had to design a more run-of-the-mill, generic, uninteresting, famous person, it would be Nikki Glazer. Allegedly, she's a comedian, despite not having the ability to be funny. And honestly, I can't think of anything she's ever been involved in that's been any good. She's heavily involved with the Comedy Central roasts, which, quite honestly, is the absolute bottom rung of show business. So while earlier I ragged on Leslie Jones and her lack of relevancy, Nikki Glazer is a person I don't understand what the point of her, considering everything I've seen her in has either been a promo or a show telling me who this person is, because she is just so run-of-the-mill and such a generic quote-unquote famous person. So again, I don't get what the people at MTV are thinking when it comes to who they cast as the host for this award ceremony, or what audience they think they're going to draw in because they have those people attached to the ceremony. But both Leslie Jones and Nikki Glazer being involved in the ceremony, I believe, is just another example of how out of touch the people that put the ceremony together really are. And all of these things are gripes I have with how this is presented, but when I took a look at the actual award categories, it makes absolutely no sense how they structure the categories. With an award ceremony that is pretty much just a transparent marketing tool to push different movies and different TV programs, as well as highlight specific actors, you think they would use that opportunity to highlight as many different films, TV shows, actors as they can. But for a lot of the categories, performances done by actors in a movie are competing against performances by actors in a TV show. While I guess you can give them points for being progressive and just saying best performance performance in a movie or a TV show includes co-ed nominees competing against each other. I don't really get the rationale behind having actors that had a performance in a movie compete against actors on a TV show. Actors in a movie have what? Maybe an hour of screen time to put in their performance and make an impression on the audience, whereas if you're on a TV show, you get multiple attempts on a weekly basis to show the audience different sides of your character. So while this is pretty nitpicky for an award ceremony that, I get it, is supposed to just be fun and not taken serious, just be a little consistent. Your award ceremony is called the MTV Movie and TV Awards. So you took the time to separate them in the title, just take the time to separate them in your award categories. And while we're on the topic of the awards, I think that this award ceremony probably has the dumbest criteria of selecting nominees out of any award ceremony, which is really saying something, but with other award ceremonies where there's actually criteria on what it takes to be nominated, the nominees for this ceremony are just chosen by the executives and producers at MTV. So a bunch of people that are out of touch and producing incredibly crappy content just get together in a room, or let's be serious, they rent a hotel because this is serious business that they have to attend to. And what I imagine happens is it's just a bunch of politicking for people that are friends with certain actors, producers, directors, filmmakers, making the case for their connection to win the award. So that's how people get nominated for these awards, and how people win the awards is allegedly done by online voting. But I have a few questions about that, considering Leslie Jones just so happens to be the host of the event, and wouldn't you know it, she just happens to win the award for Best Comedic Performance. And this was one of those categories where performances from both movies and TV shows were eligible to win. And I don't care how funny Leslie Jones was in Coming to America 2, if she was at all, there is no way she should win a Comedic Performance Award over Jason Sudeikis for his performance on Ted Lasso. And if you haven't seen Ted Lasso, go get a free subscription to Apple TV and cancel it once you've seen the show. But quite honestly, I really just believe that this award was handed to the host as a thank you for hosting. And we can dive into all the other corruption that is rampant with other award ceremonies, but if you're gonna rig an award ceremony, maybe don't make it as blatant as just handing it to the person who's hosting the event. And something else I found out about the MTV Awards while doing research for this segment, there are just some years they either don't bother or just forget to give out certain awards. Like this year, Sacha Baron Cohen won the Comedic Genius Award, which I'm not going to say he wasn't deserving of, and honestly, from what I've seen, it was the only enjoyable part of the show, as he did a sketch with himself as both Borat and Ali G. But he's only the fourth person to have won this award. They started it in 2013, giving it to Will Ferrell, decided to take a year off, gave it to Kevin Hart in 2015, gave it to Melissa McCarthy in 2016, and pretty much just forgot about the award. And that's not the only award that they have done this with. They have this award called the Trailblazer Award, which was most recently given to Jaden Pickett Smith for some reason. Really don't know what trail she's blazed, and there doesn't seem to be much criteria for giving this award. But you would think in a year where there's multiple historic events happening, from the pandemic to all the racial protests that we have seen in this country over the past year, you would think there would be at least one person or a group of people that would be worth giving an award called the Trailblazer Award to. But no, the priority is giving the MTV Reality Royalty Lifetime Achievement Award to the cast of The Jersey Shore. And I am not even going to go down that goddamn rabbit hole because there will be no happiness found there. But all in all, my main takeaway from that is if you're an award show, maybe you should give out awards that you have. Just something to consider. Don't have to do it, but may be helpful in the future. But to their credit, there is one award they seem to remember to give out on a yearly basis, and it's essentially their Lifetime Achievement Award, only this is called the Generation Award. It was awarded to Scarlett Johansson this year, and I'm not going to hate on Scarlett Johansson for getting an award recognizing her career. She's been active since she was a young kid, and the first movie I think I saw her in was Home Alone 3, so I'm not going to say she's undeserving of an award. The one thing I will say is is the absolutely contrived, stupid sketch that she and her husband Colin Jost did when she was accepting the award. He poured a bucket of slime on her head, thinking, oh, it's the Nickelodeon Awards, and she pretended to react like she was furious, even though it was the most preordained, inauthentic thing they could have done, which again gets back to the presentation issues that the MTV Awards have, where everything is just so inauthentic. This network, let alone the award show, used to be edgy and would push the envelope and provide audiences with moments that made them go, that wasn't supposed to happen. Now, like almost all mainstream media, they are afraid to push the envelope, whether it's fear from sponsorships getting pulled, backlash from audiences, angry parents complaining to the network saying, won't somebody please think of the children? So now instead of providing audiences with unscripted, unplanned moments, they're manufacturing what appears to be an unscripted moment, which at the end of the day, instead of getting people interested in your content, makes you appear as just as though you're a sideshow. You're the kid at recess that will eat a worm for $1 just so everyone is looking at them. Which I have to say, for MTV, I am not of the MTV generation, but for a network that was built around being this haven for rebellious individuals and really pushing the envelope when it came to content, it's really just sad to see how far they've fallen and how inconsequential one of their major events is and how little interest it generates. But hopefully when I'm made executive of all media, I can make sure that MTV returns to its roots of being edgy and creating controversy, because as we all know, controversy creates cash. But all in all, the lesson to be learned from this episode of the podcast: don't watch the MTV Movie and TV Awards. So I all hope you take that to heart. But that will pretty much do it for me on the GSMC Movie Podcast. I do want to thank everyone who is listening to the podcast. It means a lot to me personally. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you're always notified when a new episode drops. Also, please write us a nice review. Those really do help a lot. And be sure to follow us on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I have been your host, Richard McDonough, and that will do it for this episode of the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.